Good evening, everybody. Happy to see you all for this satsang. And we are, as Carol said, we are enjoying this beautiful time of year here. And we're also wanting to acknowledge the the solstice. And indeed, it's the time of year when the winter solstice comes in December. Here in the community where I live, we all go to the hillside on solstice morning, when the sun begins to brighten and the darkest part of the year ends, the longest night. And that's a cause for celebration. But here in the summer solstice, we're at the peak of the light, but then there's this lingering awareness that we're also at the beginning of the light waning. So, we use the light, the bright part of the year to plant the crops. And we rush around, getting everything in the ground, getting all the seed planted, all the starts. And we've just about completed doing that. And then we move into this period where we have sun and we have warmth and things grow, but that is already waning until we get to the point that the crops sort of die and yield their fruit and we harvest them. So very much here in this community aware of the seasons and the changes in the light and the length of the day and so forth. So this principle of having the light and then moving into periods where the light wanes and there is darkness to deal with is also part of our lives and part of our spiritual path. Is there are the times when the light seems bright, and then there are periods where the light wanes and we have doubts and we have challenges, and then we deal with those. But the principle here is, do we wait until the darkness is getting darker and darker and darker before we finally go, all right, what's this darkness about? What do I need to look at and come to grips with and acknowledge and explore? And so it's not a tragedy that we move into the darkness. In fact, this is the time when in nature things quiet down and the plants rest and nature goes through its sleep and is rejuvenated and refreshed and comes out of it ready to grow again. And so that's what we want on our spiritual path too, is to go into the darkness as not so much a problem, not a tragedy, but rather a time to regroup and reshape and re-examine, refurbish ourselves. But the question of Can we, at the moment when the light is the brightest and we're celebrating and everything is so great, can we use all that lightness and energy to begin the work, the inner work? Not wait until we're dragged into the inner work by some kind of suffering or problem or tragedy or darkness. So it's a little bit counterintuitive because people want to celebrate. And definitely we want to celebrate the light. But taking that light of celebration and shining it into the darkness is a good use of the light. So that the darkness isn't frightening or fearful or fear-inducing or onerous, but rather peaceful and restful. So I'm just wondering how you all personally, each of you, deal with this time and with the knowledge that, okay, the light is bright, but surely there's another cycle where the darkness comes. And I wonder if anybody would share their thoughts about that, or have you thought about that? Or how have you had a strategy about, not so much just the seasonal thing, but the moments in your life where, well, everything's going so well. Everything's going so well. I don't have to worry about meditating. I don't have to worry about, taking care of myself because everything's fine until then it's not. So have you given thought to that process? Anything anyone would share about your thoughts on when the light is bright, do I shine it into the darkness or not? And how's that worked? Arabella.
Actually, I have a curiosity, and it's not in response to your question, and I hope that it's all right. My curiosity is, sometimes when we talk about consciousness, we use the term light, and sometimes we use the term light when we mean consciousness. And I'm just wondering if you would talk a little bit about the relationship of consciousness and light. Consciousness, yeah, that's enough.
Yeah. Well, Swami Rama wrote a book called The Path of Fire and Light, where he was setting for, it's actually 2 volumes. The second volume is the preparatory practices, and the first volume actually talks about some of the very advanced practices that he had done himself and was sharing with people. Very fascinating read. But in the tantric work, we generally think of light as being the descending consciousness, the descending light of consciousness. So in our temple, in the Yom, which you've seen, the light from the top is coming down, and then there's a beam of light that comes down to the lingam, and then down into the arena of the goddesses. And so we think too of, in meditation, sometimes we talk about bringing the light down to illuminate the different chakras. So a descent, so that Shiva descends into the chakras one by one by one by one, to finally illuminate her, Shakti, who is dormant, and wake her up. And then her she, with her power, rises to manifest all kinds of things. So this is, I think this is the classic connection between the light of consciousness and the relationship of that light of consciousness to Shakti in the world of phenomena and creation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the extension of that question is, then when we come into a time seasonally where we have more hours of sunlight, can we imagine, can we make that leap that there's actually a greater consciousness during that time? Or is that just like,
Well, I think it's a different kind of consciousness.
Yeah.
It is more of the waking consciousness, meaning the mental structure of consciousness. Then the other areas in the classic scriptures, the waking consciousness, and then there's the sleep-like consciousness, and taijasa, and then there is the deep sleep, dreamless sleep, which is the prajna, which is the connection back to source, and the in the Gebsarian language, it would be the archaic. So those deeper levels are very important, and they are actually at this time in this civilization not honored, not acknowledged, not explored, not conscious, but are kept split off and separate. And that's part of the reason for our suffering. So the teaching is that we move toward integration by bringing that sleep-like consciousness and that dreamless sleep consciousness back into connected awareness with all day. So that means we're bringing into the light what has been dark. It means we're bringing the other parts of ourselves back into integration with the part that we deal with during daylight. So the integration can't happen without what we have left there in the dark. And therefore we're only partly alive because we deny that part of ourselves, and it happens while we are, quote, unconscious at night. So that when the light is there, bringing consciousness to those areas that have been dark or not conscious, not integrated, back is the road to the fourth state, Turiya, which is basically enlightenment. And nowadays we call it integral consciousness. So yeah, I mean, it gets replicated in various places, like it gets replicated in the seasons of the year, it gets replicated in the cycles of day and night, it gets replicated in the course of a lifetime. That we have our bright period when we're at our peak in our 30s, 40s, whatever. And then we start moving down and we come from a period of more inner, and then we come to that peak of worldliness, and then we move down toward receding back as we get older. And the goal is, can we hang on to one while we move into the other, the integration, really. So we get caught up in the daylight, we get caught up in the busyness of our outer life, the everyday waking consciousness. And we forget that we're breathing. We get caught up in our everyday waking consciousness with the busyness of it all, in the bright light, and then everything is beautiful, and we forget about, you know, our connection to oneness. I mean, we forget to move, we forget to act from that oneness, and we get caught up in responding on a superficial level to things around us. So this principle is what fascinates me about Solstice, is that it gets replicated in so many different levels and places, but yes, there's something that's at the heart of our whole project of spiritual advancement, or spiritual fulfillment, or spiritual completion, that is, you know, it's appropriate to think about that right now, not get too excited about the light is so bright. Yes, it is, and it's wonderful. And can we shine some of it on what's not been so bright, or not been conscious, that is an important part of ourselves? And that's not just, oh, should I remember my dreams? You know, it goes much deeper than that. And it's actually the capacity we have for using the mythical structure of consciousness, the dreamlike state, to connect with all the forces, cosmic forces, the great cosmic powers, the Mahavidyas, to connect with all the stories that underlie our actions that we never stop and think about. All this is part of who we are, that we're kind of driving blindfolded, not being aware of that. And we cut it off from our awareness. And the same thing's true of the whole region of oneness with nature, and the magic structure of consciousness, the prajna, the connection with oneness, the melting into out of ego into oneness. I mean, I was watching a video yesterday by Zach Bush on the brain, and the fact that people are having we have so many nervous system degenerative diseases now. Or we had them before, but they were rare, but they're becoming so much more common. And so many athletes now are having post-traumatic stress things from having their head hit. And you know, 30 years ago, everybody had their head hit, but that didn't happen. What is happening? Why is that happening? And he mentioned that, you know, now they're looking so closely at all the children with autism, and they are studying them from so many different angles and trying to understand. And he said, one of the things that's so remarkable about children with autism is that when you can connect with them, when they're able to connect, they're so generous and so open-hearted, and so, but the world is apparently very painful for them. And what they've discovered is that these children are most of the time in theta state, and their brainwaves are theta frequencies. And so that means they're in the mythical structure of consciousness more than the mental structure, more than everyday waking consciousness. They're in this other dreamlike place because this world has become so stressful and so full of challenges that they can't deal with it. So they have backed into this connection with the dreamlike world, which is actually potentially a step for us toward the integration of that which has been suppressed. They're holding it consciously. They can't talk about it very well because there's such a gap between that and this world. So, you know, this process of the integral appearing, stumbling along in the best way that it can. And it's trying to happen. But that's just one little example of bringing that into our consciousness. It's fascinating. And you can also argue, maybe not argue is maybe not the right word, but you can also consider that possibly while there are definitely physical stresses on us that are creating dementia and damage to the nervous system, like glyphosate, which is actually now understood to disrupt actin, which actually a substance that helps the nerves conduct their impulses along the axon of the nerve. And that's one of the reasons that people are moving into dementia more frequently and earlier stages of life. But what happens when people move into dementia, to Alzheimer's, is they actually move out of the everyday waking consciousness, out of the mental, out of the ego. You know, it's like they step back, and that's a revolutionary step. And in many ways, we need that. We need people who are stepping out of the ego and out of that world of our busy thinking and then all that, you know, and they're doing that. So is it really, I mean, yes, it has physical causes, and yes, it to those of us who are caught up in the world of busyness and ego activities, it seems like such a pity that they can't be themselves anymore. Well, maybe they're actually becoming someone more broader than we are. So we have to think, are these things that we're considering great tragedies just a way to try to break the spell that we have with our materialism and our hyperactivity and our madness that keeps us frantic all the time, so that we forget that we're a breathing person. We forget that there's a world of meditation. We forget that we're connected in this magical way with every other life form on the planet. So let's not dismiss these people that can't function in this world. Maybe they are the answer to where we need to go. Yeah.
You mentioned Zach Bush. Can you hear me?
I can barely hear you. Speak a little louder.
You mentioned Zach Bush.
Yeah.
And you touched on something that really sparked for me initially about consciousness or the light right now, feeling good. Everything's going fine. And then there's the shadow, the darkness, which could be depression or futility. And I love how Zach Bush correlated the biogeomes of the earth, that in the winter months, even the earth does not give off the life energy feed that we feed during the summer time, when it's the world is producing, the flowers are out, the birds are out, it's life, and it feels good. And I recognize why many people go into depression, as I do, and struggle with darker times without the light in the winter months. But I also thought, as you correlated it on an emotional level, sometimes when things are going well and good, it feels like God's blessing, and it's, yes, I'm doing the right thing and I'm in the flow. And then when the dark challenges happen, not just seasonally, but in our lives, it's like God's punishing us. This is rough, this is tough, I want out of here. And yet I can tell you, there are times when if I'm overwhelmed or stressed or too stimulated, that dark sleep, I do not want to come back to Earth School. I just do not want to be awake. I want to go back to sleep. So as you say, with the synthetic cities, and I live in the middle of downtown Asheville, stimulus all the time. And sometimes it's great, but where you are dancing Shiva, and when the life and the consciousness of the light is in nature, that's not manic, that's not overstimulus. It actually feeds on them, because we're living off of the bionomes or the biogeomes of the earth and the produce that everything is giving us. So that balance seems to be yin yang heightening on both aspects, dark and light, seems to be more intense.
Mm. Yeah, yes, beautiful. That's fascinating and more intense, and both are important. And our goal is to kind of hold them together rather than plunging into one or another, but kind of hold the wholeness of it, to grasp that on an ongoing basis, and then we're more complete. And
Well, I do like to admit I have my preferences.
Yeah.
More light, more light.
well, the next time the light goes low, and there's snow on the ground, come do a little private retreat at Dancing Shiva and meditate for a few days.
And then take a trip to Florida.
And then you can take it. Right.
First Dancing Shiva and then Florida.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, Karen.
Hello. Yes. So I have a question about dream state.
Yeah.
So when, and it's basically, is it really important to remember dreams or to write them down and do all that? Because when I'm, especially the last probably 6 months, go into dream state and I'm learning all these things. I'm going places that are unbelievable, and to come out of that, oftentimes they're immediately gone. But when I try to bring them in, it seems counterproductive to me to try to make sense out of it, to try to make it make sense in this reality, rather than just allowing it to be what it is. And
Right.
but I keep hearing people say it's so important that you write your dreams down and you remember them and such. And
Yeah.
I'm curious
well,
about that.
Thank you. That's great. That's a fascinating question. I think that maybe if we could think of it as not trying to put them into words as much as don't forget the experience, trying to hang on to the experience without trying to force it into the words and thoughts that we use during the daytime, because then that kills it, sort of diminishes it, as you were saying. But maybe if we could hang on to our dream experience and see if we can try to become fluent with using that way of seeing the world during the day. And because it's like we diminish the dreams by trying to interpret them into words, and we also deny their power. Because that structure of consciousness, that taijasa, that the theta state, the mythical structure of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, it has its own language and its own perceptions, its own way of being alive. And that's what we need to reconnect with, not some diminished form of it, because then that just perpetuates the split. And I think maybe that's what you're saying. So yeah. But if you can maybe do a drawing, or do something that gets the essence of it so that it begins to permeate your daytime life, that feeling, that way of being, that the experience,
the felt sense of it.
Kind of find a way to hang on to that.
Yeah, bring that felt sense of the dream into,
bring it in as it is, not trying to, cut off its heel, sort of fit in the glass slipper or something.
And I wonder about the autistic, that do they come into the world in theta state? Like, I wonder if they aren't in that state trying to make sense of everything. The autistic
well,
people, like, I don't know that that's a coping mechanism as much as maybe the way that they are coming into the world, and they're just not equipped to deal with us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question, and I don't think we know yet. Just beginning to realize, oh, that's what they're doing. And, you know, well, they're so generous, he said, because they're not in the ego world. You know, they're not in that state of the beta waves, and where you're so egotistic. They're in the ego. They aren't there at all. They're in this other state where there's much more connection and openness. And he said it, you know, it just brings tears to my eyes sometimes because they're so generous and open-hearted. But, you know, I remember one time when my ex-wife and I had our kids in New York, and we had two of them in a stroller, and we got out of an elevator, and the guy said to Sky, who was the son and daughter, they were almost the same age, and he said, kid, wipe that smile off your face. New York will knock it out of you. And I thought, what? But it was truth in what he was saying. You know, it's a horrible thing to say, because the kids are in this wonderful world, and then, okay, so we're going to throw you into this reality, and that'll knock that out of you. But can we be in this reality and hang on to the other part? Then we can transform this reality into something that is suitable for the whole of us instead of just a distorted part of us. So we've created a world that will function for the ego and the narrow interests of the ego and greed and materialism. And then we suffer from those constrictions. So we have to hang on to these other parts of ourselves and bring them into play and say, wait a minute, we have to change this world. This is not allowing us to express this part of ourselves. We've got to take this wall down and that wall down. And you know, and then people say, well, you're acting kind of crazy. And say, yes, and that's what we need.
More of that, please.
Maybe I qualify for that at the moment. But because these are things that people don't say, you know, this is violating the agreement that we're going to live in this constricted world. And if you violate that, you know, well, you got to take a pill or something, because you're screwy. But I say, let's do it. Great.
Thank you.
Yes, somebody's emerging from the darkness.
Hello, this is Jody.
Hi, Jody.
I'm curious if you can say, kind of going on what the conversation has been going. I've been reviewing Tapas and Spanda a lot the last week, and maybe you can just speak a little bit about Spanda. And Kali Rising, it's saying like that the tantric path will choose more alive every time. And this concept of like participating joyfully, like in the coordinated dance of the natural world, and how that's yeah, maybe you can just talk a little bit about the embodiment of Spanda, and if Spanda somehow has more of a connection, now that we're talking about the other realms of consciousness, it seems like Spanda is actually arising maybe from the magical realm of consciousness.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's a good question. Okay, yes, from the magic. But see, each of these structures of consciousness, each of these different aspects of our life, the waking consciousness, the dreamlike state, the dreamless sleep, these are all have acquired their own form in our socialization, how we're trained and how our minds begin to take shape and growing up. But they are in their essence coming from the archaic, from the oneness, from the unitary consciousness. And to the extent that we elaborate on them and they take different forms and get disconnected from that oneness, that's when we feel unhappy, and that's when we feel dissatisfied, and that's when we have problems, and that's when we do crazy things. So we want to get back to that connection And as we move along in our evolution, each time we find a new way of being, moving from the dreamlike period of, the thousands of years ago to the waking state of the last couple thousand years, we lose some of the connection, and that creates. And there's also been the whole process of suppressing the mythical, for example, the dreamless state, pushing it on way down so we can't experience it in the day. That's all something we've done over a long period of time, very long period of time. So spanda, yes, arises if it's true. The more it's coming from oneness, the more it's coming from the origin. That's what Gebser calls the origin. The more it's coming from that oneness, the more authentic it seems, and the more seamlessly it integrates into everyone else's spanda. You see, that's how it can work. Otherwise, people say, well, if you just do what you want to him, he does what he wants to, the world will be chaotic and everybody will be killing each other and it will be a nightmare. Well, but the question is, where are you deriving that inspiration to do what you do freely and spontaneously? If it's just from some habits or some training, it probably is going to result in conflict and dissonance and great problem. But if it's coming from its source, all things come from that source, they move together perfectly in the greater plan that we can't understand. So true spanda, if we're going to say spanda, there are sometimes our spanda is not so, authentic or true, then and that's often true with us, but the closer we get to that connection to the oneness, the freer we can be in our expressions, because we know that it's the right thing to do. We don't have to stop and second guess ourselves because we can feel where it's coming from. And that's a tricky thing, but that's why we need to expand our consciousness to include the past levels. So we're totally in this oneness, not split into different pieces. And then we can sense our connection with the deeper, more authentic spanda, and and we are free. Then we experience true freedom, because we're free to do, quote, whatever we want, because what we want is what the universe wants. And and we aren't then in a place where, well, my underlying ulterior motive is to see if I can get more money out of you, because that's not what comes from the source of the oneness. And so this is the whole principle, actually, of the spiritual path, is to get back to that place where we can be like Shiva. We can dance, but we dance with full spontaneity and totally. We don't stop and think, oh, am I doing the wrong? No, it's coming from this deeper, deeper place where all the dance comes from, and all the music comes from, and all the love comes from, and all the harmony and beauty of the universe comes from. So that's where we're trying to tap into. Did I wander from your question, or is that getting to what you wanted to hear?
That's beautiful. And I would just follow up with, from what I understand, the way that I can differentiate whether it's coming from that deeper place versus whether it's coming from habits and fears is through the body.
Yes, and that takes us back sort of to the magic, to our connection with I call it our portable piece of Gaia, which is our physical body. This is nature. We're not this thing separate from nature. This body is part of nature. It is an integral and part of nature. And so when we can tune into those sensations, can give us a clue as to whether it's truly authentic. Yes. But when we have ruled out the magic structure of consciousness, and all the connection with nature, which we have in our narrow world that we live in, most people don't have any access to what the body's telling them. And that's why, you know, there are tools to teach people to have somatic experience and so forth, to be able to be in touch with your body. Yoga is designed to help you be in touch with your body. Breath work helps you be in touch with it. So then, you know, it does help, yes, very much. Great. Thank you for that question.
This is David. As you're talking about people with autism being in the theta state and people with dementia, it has me wondering if, you know, we have this perception if somebody is dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's, then this is a tragedy, and we try to keep them from going over the precipice or something with medication and whatever we can do. And I wonder if and there's also tends to be a lot of, you know, sadness around that. Oh, they don't remember things. And I wonder if we're missing the gifts that those people have, being in a different state of consciousness.
Right. Yeah, I think we are. I think we're missing. You know, it's just that, what's the word? The other is always inferior. You know, if it's not like me, it's inferior. If it's not like what we're doing, then it's diminished. Well, maybe it's exploring other things that we need to become aware of. And so could we quit drugging people and listen to them, you know, and find out, well, what's going on in there? Where are you? What is it like where you are? I had that experience once when I was in Colombia in South America, and I was lecturing, and I was staying with this family, and the mother had Alzheimer's, and her daughter was talking with her, and it was like a conversation I'd never heard, you know, because her daughter was adopting her logic, her language, her way of proceeding from one thing to the other. And they were having a wonderful conversation. But, you know, you could say it doesn't make any sense, but actually it made sense to both of them. And I was so impressed that she had found her way into communicating with her mother in this way that wasn't supercilious or condescending. It was really genuine, you know, like, oh yeah, I get what you're saying, and and, you know, wow, okay, I didn't know about this. Yeah, great. So yes, and I think the same thing's true of autistic children, and those people on the autistic spectrum, you know, which we poo-poo. What was that movie we saw recently? And it was kind of a comedy, little romantic comedy. But anyway, the girl broke up with the boyfriend, and she said, well, actually, I think he was, if you want to know the truth, a little bit Asperger's. You know? So she was like, okay, you break up with me, I'll put you down. And you know, that's you're just, you know, like not like a real person, just Asperger, you know, or you know, Alzheimer, or these poor men whose names are used to designate these things. I can't imagine how they feel about that, turning over in their graves. Yes, George.
It's a very different level, but the discussion's really reminding me of Stanislav Grof and his comments that sometimes schizophrenia is actually a spiritual awakening.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
It really, and there seemed to be also, as you were talking about spanda in this topic, that there's always an open-heartedness to spanda.
There's always what?
An open-heartedness to spanda.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it went also a bit deeper, that not only is this your heart chakra open, but also your chakras in general are aligned.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Well, everybody can do some research on that and watch when you feel like, wow, this is really true spanda, what's happening in different centers in your body. And can you add some data to that? That's a great hypothesis. And I think it probably will be borne out with the data, but let's do the research. Everybody. Why not explore that? Sounds fascinating. Okay. Anybody else have a comment or a question?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
So what George just said about schizophrenia, and according to Groff, that could be a spiritual emergence. That could also be spanda.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. I think that is true. So we are about to embark at this in 3 days, 4 days, into our intensive week on what we call meltdown in Tantra. And Gerald's going to be leading that that weekend, facilitating that study of what happens when people lose it, and what's trying to emerge. And so that's really one of the things we've been reading is Stan Groff and spiritual emergence. And I think that generally speaking, yes, that is the driving force for a lot of psychosis. If something's trying to break through and break out, and the social milieu is not able to accommodate it and wants to demonize it. But I think also having worked in state hospitals way back before the medication and just at the beginning of medication, a lot of times when people had been repeatedly traumatized in their effort to make a breakthrough, that they settled on kind of games they would play with people in ways that were their own adaptation, but it was that freshness of the spanda got lost because it was they were knocked around so much. Yes, especially psychosis, and we knew that in psychiatry 40, 50 years ago, that young people with a psychotic break had a better prognosis than people who had been hospitalized for 20 years. So we need to understand those people too, like we want to understand the people with like you say, like the people with dementia, the people with
Autism.
What?
Autism.
Yes, autism. And they're different, but it's the same situation in a way, that we have created a reality that isn't even very comfortable for us. And for them, it's impossible. And so when any of these three groups of people, when they don't conform to the behavior that we think is the right way, which is a very impoverished life, then we treat them as less than, and really don't take them seriously and pathologize them. Now we have a diagnosis. You have this, and you're not like real people. So we institutionalize, put them away somewhere. Can't tolerate that. Or drug them until they sit in the corner and stare at the wall. But we're missing the opportunity to find out, oh, hey, where are you? What's happening there? And that's a great loss for us, because we need to know, we need to, push the envelope. We need to push the walls out. They're too tight. And they're trying to do it. Maybe not so gracefully, or maybe not in a way that appeals to us, but still, any inspiration we can get should be welcomed. Yeah. Thank you. So the book, the writer that George was talking about, Stanislav Grof, and most of you probably heard of him, but he and his wife wrote several books on what they call spiritual emergency or spiritual emergence, that when people have a break, that it's the spirit trying to find a way to become more whole. And it's a revolutionary concept. But then came the medications, and now the routine is just to put people on medications, which is almost universal in psychiatric institutions. And not to try to deal with them as human beings, but rather pathologize them, medicate them, and keep them quiet. So that's our loss, And we don't have to keep doing it. We can stop that now. Okay, any last minute thoughts?
I'm curious if you would use spanda interchangeably with life force.
Can you speak a little closer to your microphone?
Sorry. Would you use spanda interchangeably with life force?
I would think spanda is a larger concept than life force, but yes, I mean, life force, the true life force is spanda, but I think spanda might include other things than what we would call the life force, like cosmic things. Like planets moving or stars exploding or whatever. And, it would be a stretch to apply the term life force to that for us, but actually it's probably all the same. Does that help? Okay. Good. Well, I appreciate you all being here and participating in this discussion. It's been fun, fascinating, exciting, stimulating. And yeah, think about all these things as we move from the solstice into tomorrow, when the light is a little less. And let's remember the cycles and the opportunity to bring light into the darkness. And then by bringing light into the darkness, we really mean bringing it into awareness, which means expanding our awareness. So the more we do that, the more we become complete beings and integrated beings. So, okay, Carol, I'll turn this over to you and let you talk about.
Wow, I'm glad we were recording tonight. It was a good one. So yeah, wish me luck for next week. Thank you. So I announced this earlier, and I'm going to say it again. We will not be offering this Zoom session next Sunday. So we're taking a break so that we can keep the flow of our teaching, our training going. So join us July. I don't know what that date is. 2 weeks from tonight in July, and that will be, we'll be doing a meditation on the topic tonight, the lightness and darkness, and perhaps spanda. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining. You can unmute and say good night and say thank you, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you
Good
for
night.
being here.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Be well.
Good luck, Gerald.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes, Carol, good luck. Good luck.
Behave
You'll
yourself,
be
Helen.
great. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.